work by Hans Holbein the Younger that hangs in the Museum of Basel. Dostoevsky places a copy of the painting in the house of the young merchant millionaire Rogojin. It is discussed twice in the novel, the second time at length and in a key passage. The shape of the painting is unusual. The narrator describes it as being around 6 feet wide and no more than 10 inches high. It is, in other words, totally lacking in vertical dimension. Dostoevsky first read about Holbein's painting in Nikolai Karamzin's Letters of a Russian Traveller, 1801, an account of the young author's travels in Europe, modelled on Lawrence Stern's Sentimental Journey. In a letter written from Basel, Karamzin mentions that he has been to the picture gallery there and looked with great attention and pleasure at the paintings of the illustrious Holbein, a native of Basel and friend of Erasmus. Of this painting in particular, giving it yet another title, he observes, "In Christ taken down from the cross, one doesn't see anything of God. As a dead man, he is portrayed quite naturally. According to legend, Holbein painted it from a drowned Jew." That is all. But these few words must have made a strong impression on Dostoevsky. In August 1867, on their way from Baden-Baden to Geneva, he and his young wife made a special stop in Basel to see the painting. Dostoevsky's wife, Anna Grigorievna, wrote an account of their visit to the museum in her memoirs, published 40 years later. "On the way to Geneva we stopped for a day in Basel, with the purpose of seeing a painting in the museum there that my husband had heard about from someone. This painting, from the brush of Hans Holbein, portrays Jesus Christ, who has suffered inhuman torture, has been taken down from the cross and given over to corruption. His swollen face is covered with bloody wounds, and he looks terrible. The painting made an overwhelming impression on my husband, and he stood before it as if dumbstruck. When I returned some 15 or 20 minutes later, I found my husband still standing in front of the painting as if riveted to it. There was in his agitated face that expression as of fright which I had seen more than once in the first moments of an epileptic fit. I quietly took him under the arm, brought him to another room, and sat him down on a bench, expecting a fit to come at any moment. Fortunately, that did not happen." In a stenographic diary kept at the time of the visit itself, she noted, "Generally it looked so much like an actual dead man that I really think I wouldn't dare stay in the same room with it." But F. admired this painting. Wishing to have a closer look at it, he stood on a chair, and I was very afraid he'd be asked to pay a fine, because here one gets fined for everything. Each of the 3 main male characters of the novel, the saintly idiot Mushkin, the passionate, earthbound Rogojin, and the consumptive nihilist Hippolyte, defines himself in relation to this painting. The question it poses hangs over the whole novel. What if Christ was only a man? What if he suffered, died, and was left a bruised, lifeless corpse, as Holbein shows him? It is, in other words, the question of the resurrection. Dostoevsky, who was very careful about the names he gave his characters, calls the heroine of the idiot Nastasia, a shortened form of Anastasia. Anastasis is resurrection in Greek. Her last name, Barashkov, comes from the Russian word for lamb. The name of the novel's hero, Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mushkin, is also worth considering. It draws a pointed and oddly insistent comment from the clerk Lebedev on its first mention at the start of the novel. The name's historical. It can and should be found in Karamzin's history. Karamzin's History of the Russian State was one of the most popular books of 19th-century Russia. In his Diary of a Writer, 1873, Dostoevsky recalls, "I was only 10 when I already knew virtually all the principal episodes of Russian history, from Karamzin, whom in the evenings father used to read aloud to us. He could assume a similar knowledge among his contemporaries. But as the literary scholar Tatiana Kazatkina pointed out in a recent lecture, later commentators on the idiot have generally failed to follow Lebedev's suggestion. Looking at Karamzin's history..."